The rain was falling so hard that night in Ohio it felt like the sky itself was grieving. Jacob Miller stood under the flickering streetlight outside St. Andrew's Community Shelter, holding his 6-year-old daughter's tiny pink backpack in one hand and a plastic bag of groceries in the other. He had learned how to survive storms, both the kind that flooded the streets and the kind that shattered hearts, but nothing prepared him for the words he would hear inside that building. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet miracles that happen when broken people choose love over fear, take a moment right now to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this matter because they remind us what it means to be human. Jacob had been raising his daughter, Ava, alone for nearly 3 years after his wife passed away from a sudden illness. The world had become smaller and colder. He worked long hours as a delivery driver in Columbus, Ohio, rushing between shifts and bedtime stories, living on too little sleep and too many memories. The house still carried the scent of his late wife's lavender perfume, and sometimes, late at night, he would sit at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from him, wondering if he had failed somehow, failed to save her, failed to hold his family together. Ava was his anchor. Her laughter was the only sound that pushed back the silence. But children grow, and they begin to ask questions that pierce straight through the armor of a grieving father. She asked why other kids had 2 parents at school events. She asked why her daddy always looked tired. She asked if he would ever find someone to love again. Jacob never knew how to answer that last question. He had tried once, briefly, to meet someone through a church gathering. It ended awkwardly when he realized he wasn't ready to open his heart. Since then, he poured himself into work and fatherhood, telling himself that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. That rainy Thursday, he wasn't at the shelter for himself. He volunteered twice a month, helping distribute food and winter clothes. He believed that if he couldn't fix his own heartbreak, maybe he could ease someone else's. That was when he saw her. Her name was Rachel Thompson. She was sitting alone near the back wall, shoulders hunched, fingers nervously twisting the strap of her worn handbag. She looked no older than 30, but her eyes carried decades of exhaustion. There was a small bruise fading along her wrist, half hidden beneath her sweater sleeve. When Jacob approached to hand her a meal package, she hesitated before taking it, as if even kindness came with conditions. Over the next few weeks, he noticed her returning. She never spoke much, always keeping her distance, always looking like she was ready to run. One evening, Ava had tagged along to help organize donated books. She wandered toward Rachel and offered her a children's novel with a bright smile. Something in Rachel's face cracked open at that moment, and she thanked the little girl in a voice that trembled. It was the first time Jacob heard her speak. Slowly, cautiously, they began exchanging small conversations. He learned that Rachel had left an abusive relationship months earlier. She had no family nearby, no stable job, and no confidence left in herself. She was attending counseling sessions through a local support program in Ohio, trying to rebuild a life she felt had been shattered beyond repair. One evening, as the shelter emptied and rain once again tapped against the windows, Rachel finally looked at him with raw honesty. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything she had endured. She told him she was not fit for any man. She said she was damaged goods, that she came with too much pain, too many scars, both visible and invisible. She believed that any man who got close would eventually see her brokenness and walk away. Jacob didn't answer immediately. Instead, he felt something shift inside him. For years, he had secretly believed he was broken too burdened by grief, too emotionally unavailable, too afraid of losing someone again. Listening to Rachel felt like staring into a mirror. He began to see that her fear was not weakness, it was survival, and perhaps his own guarded heart wasn't strength, it was avoidance. Over the following months, their connection deepened. They met for coffee after volunteer shifts, sometimes with Ava coloring at the table beside them. Rachel would laugh softly at Ava's silly jokes, and Jacob would catch glimpses of the woman she used to be before fear became her shadow. But healing is never a straight road. There were days when Rachel canceled plans without explanation, retreating into silence. There were moments when Jacob felt frustration rising, the old fear whispering that this was too complicated. His friends advised him to be careful. A single father, they said, didn't need more emotional chaos. Yet each time he considered stepping back, he remembered the way Rachel looked at Ava, with a mixture of tenderness and longing, as if she couldn't believe such innocence still existed. He remembered the night she stayed late at the shelter organizing donated coats simply because she wanted to give back. He saw resilience beneath her doubt. The real turning point came when Ava fell ill with a high fever one weekend. Jacob was overwhelmed, juggling work calls and doctor visits. Without hesitation, Rachel showed up at their small home with homemade soup and sat by Ava's bedside, reading her stories until she fell asleep. Watching from the doorway, Jacob felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. Later that night, Rachel admitted she was terrified. She was afraid she would fail them, afraid that her past would one day spill into their present, afraid that she didn't deserve a man who had loved so deeply before. Jacob finally found his voice. He told her that love wasn't about being perfect or unscarred. It was about choosing each other despite the scars. He confessed that he too felt unworthy at times, haunted by guilt and grief. But maybe, he said, two imperfect people could build something stronger precisely because they understood pain. Rachel cried, not the silent tears of shame she had carried for years, but the kind that cleanse and release. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her story didn't end with brokenness. Months passed. Rachel found steady work at a local bookstore in Columbus. She continued therapy, slowly rebuilding her confidence. Jacob learned to open up about his late wife without drowning in sorrow. Ava began calling Rachel her bonus grown-up, a title that made them all laugh. They weren't a perfect family. There were difficult conversations, moments of insecurity, and days when old fears resurfaced. But instead of running, they faced them together. And that made all the difference. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves blanketed the park near their home, Jacob realized how far they had come. Rachel was pushing Ava on the swings, her laughter ringing freely through the air. The woman who once believed she was unfit for love now looked radiant in simple joy. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe for more stories that remind us healing is possible. And before we reach the end, I have a small request. Comment the word hope if you believe that no one is too broken to be loved. That evening, sitting together on a worn wooden bench, Rachel admitted something had changed inside her. She no longer saw herself as damaged. She saw herself as a survivor. And she realized that the man beside her wasn't rescuing her. He was walking with her. Jacob squeezed her hand gently, understanding that love had not erased their pasts. It had simply rewritten their future. The rainstorm still came to Ohio. Life still carried uncertainty. But inside that modest home filled with bedtime stories and shared meals, there was warmth again. There was courage. There was a second chance, neither of them expected. And perhaps the greatest miracle was this. The woman who once believed she was unfit for any man had taught a grieving single father that hearts don't need to be flawless to be worthy. They just need to be brave enough to open. If this story moved you, don't scroll away without letting us know. Like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who may be standing in their own storm, waiting for a reason to believe in love again. Because sometimes the words that change everything are not loud declarations, but quiet confessions spoken in the rain.